I'm going to start with really simple ingredients that you can get anywhere. The theme is health, overall well-being, but at the core of this is that there's no point in being super healthy if it makes you super unhappy or super broke. You know, we've got to do the best we can. So first of all, I'm going to show you how to make oat milk. Now, oat milk it got quite popular around the early 2000s with Oatly. It's quite affordable, but if you're buying it regularly, especially for the family, it's really expensive. Instead, you can make it at home so easily. Now, I bought this for less than £1. So I've got I had a kilo of oats. And you can make oat milk to your own consistency. I usually use 1 cup of oats. I've popped this in my blender already to about half a litre to a litre's worth of water. It depends how creamy you want those oats to be. Literally, you pop them in the blender, you take some water, whether it's straight from the tap or you filtered it. I hope you can see this. All of the measurements you can have written down. They'll go through an email, or you can also find these recipes on my website. There's a ton of oat milk recipes on the internet with other people as well. And literally, I'm going to blend the oats and the liquid together. I've got a litre of water to about almost a full cup of oats. Sorry about the noise. Bowl here, or you could use a jug, whatever you prefer. And this is also, if you're in the nutrition session on Monday, when I made the green juice, not using a juicer, I made a juice using a blender. Well, that's when you're really sad, isn't it? Distinguishing the difference between juice and a blender. I think I'm going to need a bigger bowl. So what I tend to do is if I'm very busy, this is a really easy thing to do if you're always short on time. I'm going to take this bag here. Now, this is called a nut bag or a nut milking bag. It's basically a piece of muslin cloth that's been sewn together. So you can buy one on Amazon. You can make your own out of muslin cloth. Handy for making cheese, like nut cheeses or thickening yogurt. You could use a new pair of tights. Don't use an old pair of tights, especially if they're not your own. And then I just pour everything in here. Take it to one side. And literally, it's called a milking bag for a reason. I'm going to milk the nuts. Now, there might be more oat pulp in here if I'd made a larger batch. There's just 2 of us in the house, so I don't want to make too much. And I also did a little, here's some I made earlier yesterday, so I'm really going to have way too much. Normally what I do, if I've made a lot, and this is the same with making a juice using a nut milking bag, is I'll squeeze a little bit, but instead of getting messy, I'll actually tie. I wonder if you can see this on the side. I'll do it over here. I'll actually let it drip dry, so I haven't got to get messy, and squeeze out the last bits. Leave the bowl underneath. I go off, I brush my teeth, I wash my hair, do whatever it is I need to do. And then once it's finished dripping, I'll come back to it and I'll squeeze out the remaining last bits. So here is the oat milk. It's really delicious. Let's try some. It's actually oh my God. It's actually sweet of its own accord. If you wanted to now, with this liquid, you could pop it back in the blender. Now there's some oat pulp left in here. I don't normally want to waste that, but because I've got you guys watching, I'm going to pop this in the side and I'll deal with it later. You could actually pop the oat milk back in here and blend it up with something to sweeten, whether it's a maple syrup, whether it's an agave syrup. There's a whole debate as to whether maple or agave are good for us. I know they can be quite expensive. You could blend it with some dried fruit, 1 date, a fig, anything you wanted. I actually prefer to keep it plain because it's sweet as it is. I might put a little bit of sea salt in there just to bring out the flavour, especially if I was then going to put some cacao powder in there. If you're making anything with chocolate, always add a little bit of sea salt because it just brings out that flavour. And that reminds me, while I'm on salt, if you can, always buy some, a natural salt, whether it's a Himalayan salt, the pink Himalayan rock salt, or a sea salt. Particularly, I think most of you guys are in Ireland. Get hold of that Celtic sea salt. It's the best. Normal table salt. that you buy in supermarkets that's not labelled as natural sea salt or Himalayan rock salt, just normal table salt. That is processed so heavily. In order to process it, what happens is salt actually will turn black or grey. They bleach it to go back to white. And there's a ton of other reasons why I would stay away from table salt if you can. So just always go to natural and you're absolutely fine. Obviously with processed foods, ready-made foods, we can't always control what type of salt they've used to season those foods. A friend of mine who did a diploma at cookery school told me, I said, what's the biggest thing you've learned from cooking? Like, what's the most important thing you've got out of it? And she went, how much salt they put into food, particularly in restaurants, particularly in processed food. For the type of person that doesn't have much processed food or go to restaurants very often, and you're using natural salt at home, I wouldn't be too afraid of putting salt on food, because you probably need it rather than actually need to veer away from it. So what I'm going to do with the oat milk, I'm actually going to make a cake. This is so easy. I've only just developed this recipe. I'll show you quickly. So this is a pear and mulberry cake. It's delicious. It's very, very easy to make. It's basically a 2-bowl dish. Before we do that, I just want to show you what you can do with oat pulp. So after you've strained your oat milk, and you can use that for whatever you want, we're going to use it in the recipe. I've actually got this pulp. Now you can use this, don't throw it away. And this is where it becomes a really, really affordable thing that you can use anytime. You can use this as wet pulp in a cake mixture if you wanted to. I could use it in this cake, but I'm not going to. What I would do is I would take that pulp and I'd spread it thinly on a baking sheet or a baking tray and pop it in the oven on a very low setting. From there, like the minimum setting you have, if you can leave it on sort of 50, 60 degrees, maybe even leave the oven door open a little bit and just leave it there to dehydrate and go a little bit crispy. And then you'll have this. So this is the oat pulp and it's now really, really dry. I'm going to take a dry blender. The blender has to be completely dry. If the blender is wet, got any liquid in it, then you're basically just going to turn the oat crust back into oat pulp. I crack it on. It could go for a bit longer to really become a fine meal. But I've now got, here's the laptop so you can see it. I've now got oat flour as well. So all of a sudden, from buying a quid for a bag of oats, you've got enough oat milk probably to last a family of 4 for 1 week, maybe even 2 weeks. If you make oat milk at home, that one batch of milk is not going to last 2 weeks. You'd make it in stages. Oat milk will last in the fridge for about 1 to 5 days, depending on how often you're opening your fridge door. You've also got oat flour. So if you're looking at any of those very, very healthy recipes and using all those specialty flours, you haven't got to go out and buy it and pay a £5 for a tiny little bag. You can actually make it yourself out of the wastage from making oat milk at home. And this was less than a cup worth of oats to get all of that. You can do exactly the same with nuts. Almonds, Brazils, macadamia. Macadamia nut milk is delicious. Obviously, that's a bit more expensive. Almond milk is very, very popular. but oat milk does the same job. And again, remember, you can make that milk as thick and as creamy as you like, or thin it out a little bit. It just depends on the amount of oats to water ratio. So the less oats and more water, it's going to be a thinner consistency. If you use a lot of oats with less water, it's going to be a very thick, creamy oat milk at the end of it. The thickness of milk I make depends on what I'm going to use it for. So I love making milkshakes. I will blend up the milk with some banana, maybe some cacao powder, a bit of salt in there. Some people like to put tahini in. I'm not a fan of putting tahini in, but you have literally got two quite expensive products in the supermarket from a bag of standard oats. What oats should you use? I would use steel cut if I can, but it's not essential. It's completely up to you. So we'll get these out of the way.